Today on The Future of Everything, the future of how we use digital media. So when we talk about media, we're basically referring to the means of communication in society: broadcast, print, internet, and many other forms. And our exposure to media and the consumption of information has been radically transformed, I think, as we all know, in the last 30 years. For example, our ways of obtaining and interacting are evolving incredibly rapidly. At the turn of the 1900s, basically you could read, you could write, you could talk, and those were the primary ways of gathering and disseminating information. Radio and quickly thereafter television provided these big pipes, one-way channels of information to the entire country and the world. And then starting in the 1990s, the internet emerged and people could now interact in both directions, but not only person to person, but person to small group, medium group, large group, with sound and ultimately video. And of course, now we have these phones, tablets, computers that offer us an unbelievable array of options for gathering information and disseminating it. We have news sites, social media, email, texting, Instagram, apps that I've never heard of because I am greater than 20 years old, but I make that note because young people are adopting and using these at rate that make the head spin of many of their elders. We have 1- and 2-year-olds who are interacting with computational devices before they can talk, and definitely before they can read and write. So is this making us more or less effective at our jobs, at our decision-making about finances, politics, personal lifestyle choices? Is it making us more or less effective in our relationships? Is it healthy for us? How do we even study the sources and exposures to media in this rapidly changing and very diverse world of media options? Well, Professor Byron Reeves is a professor of communications at Stanford University. He has studied the processing of media and the social and emotional responses to media, among many other topics. He leads a fascinating new project aimed at understanding how people interact with their screens each day. And when I say screen, I mean the screen of the phone, the screen of the computer, or the tablet. And what does those interactions tell us about the individuals and about society in general? So Byron, thanks for being here. And you have coined the phrase Screenom to describe this latest of projects. Can you tell us what is the Screenom project and what motivates it?
So, hi Russ, great to be with you. The Screenom is an attempt to try to find the signature of all the things we're doing with screens. I think so it's like the genome. We got the word from, other sciences. It's complex, it's made of lots of fragments, lots of different sessions, a huge amount of different content, multiple screens, multiple applications. It's just, information all over the place. So I think there are two motivations. One that's recent, one that's kind of COVID era, but you started out with the first motivation, which is trying to keep up with the pace of this digital revolution that was promised 25 years ago. We think that something has happened in the last couple of years to really start completing what we knew was going to happen. And that is that we've got so much of life now that is capable of being put onto a screen. And we were saying this in January and last year and the year before, but think now since March, what we've all been doing on our screens. We are cramming so much of life into media on our screens. So social relationships, money, health, politics, our home irrigation system, everything is on a screen. And it's a piece of media. It's got an interface. It has pictures and words and a narrative and a backstory. And it's just like a piece of media. And there's now so much of it. And it is so available for us to chunk up and watch in whatever way we want, that any conversation about whether this is a good or bad thing has to start with, what are people actually doing with this material? And our first thought was really kind of a methods thought. We got to more conceptual explanations of what's happened, but a methods thought is we really don't know that much about how people are making their way through smartphones. I can tell you they're not watching 5-minute news stories, 10-minute news stories, let alone 90-minute feature films without doing a whole lot of other things. So
yeah, so let's go back to the, and I've read a little bit about this. So what you're doing is you've actually built a computational infrastructure, and you have gotten volunteers, and correct me if I'm wrong, who basically have allowed you to take a screenshot of what they're looking at, something like every 5 seconds throughout their day, and then over long periods of time. And so what, is that right? And then what do you do with that data to make any kind of sense of it?
Yeah, so that's exactly right. It's a complicated process. We put software, the participants don't have to do anything. All they have to do is use their devices as they regularly would. But we're getting screenshots of what actually is in front of people's eyes periodically, or every 5 seconds throughout the day. And over the course, we started out with a couple of weeks, but now we're doing it. We have participants that are committing to up to a year of providing these screenshots. So millions and millions of screenshots for a single subject, or hundreds of subjects as the project is unfolding. But that's, as you can imagine, a large computational task to try to gather and store and catalog all that information. But that's the first thing that we're doing.
And I'm sure people are wondering, these people must have been fully informed of what you were doing, and you must have some sort of privacy guarantees, because people do a lot of things with their screens.
Yes. Well, so privacy and security is a huge, huge issue for us. We couldn't have started or continued this project without lots of due diligence about consent, and the university, as you know, through its internal review boards are looking at what we're doing and what we're promising subjects. So, and how we're storing data, what researchers can look at in the data. Most of the data so it is very private. It's the most personal stuff in the world. It's everything that's on your screen. And I mean, we see everything. And if you're doing this for a year, after a couple days, either people don't care or they're forgetting that they're part of our research.
Right, which is probably what you would want as a researcher, so you get kind of unvarnished access to their habits.
But we talk about the privacy issue and security issue every time the lab meets, and it's just a huge issue for us. So no one's going to look at the raw data of these screens outside of a very tight-knit group in a Stanford lab under very strict conditions. And the other thing to say is, for the most part, this is a computational project. So 99% of the information we're collecting is being examined by a computer, and that's trying to discover the words that are being used, trying to identify the pictures, trying to keep up with the trajectory or the velocity of change, or 100 different other things. So the computational part of it is big, but to train the computer, we need to actually have humans look at some of this. So, but security is just a huge issue.
Okay, great. So now we have this unbelievable, and you said you're following people for up to a year, which just boggles the mind. And then you capture this, you put it in the computer. As you said, the computer has to do the initial pass at figuring out what's going on because it's just too much data. What did you decide would be the first sets of questions to ask? I would guess that you have to do some kind of thing to validate to yourself that this is really working, and then start asking new questions. So how do you approach like doing an analysis with the kind of data that no one has ever had before?
So that's a great question. So we're all empiricists, quantitative psychology, med-oriented computational folks. But the first thing we did was just string together the images in movies of what people were actually doing. We might look at it in a large high definition display, but we actually became, by necessity, kind of qualitative researchers in the first instance, just watching the movies of what people were doing.
And when you say movie, you mean actually watching these frames every 5 seconds to see?
So let's watch a day of Russ's digital device use.
Wow.
And we're not saying Russ, and we don't, right. But we wanted to just see, unencumbered by ideas of what people actually do with media, what they're doing. And there are a couple of things that are just so obvious. You just watch a couple of these movies or look at all these images strung together. Short, short, short. Whatever Russ is doing, it is short. It's on average 10 to 20 seconds per segment. There are up to 300 different sessions on your smartphone per day. It's just fragmented, short stuff that is bursty, high velocity change, and that you just come away with that. So that's the kind of result that we get just visually examining what's happening in here. And that's a bit of a surprise because that's different than how we usually conceive of technology and media, as people kind of more passively sitting back, looking at whatever packages of information the media sources create, and then we'll watch it from start to finish, and and then we'll kind of catalog that with all the rest of the stuff we do. So the first thing we do is that qualitative pass, and then we turn the computers on to try to quantify these images in a whole lot of other ways.
Yeah, so this sounds like a fascinating experiment even in itself, because let me ask, how variable are those kinds of numbers that you just quoted me across different people? Are there people who linger and take longer amounts of time and people who are rapid shifters? Or is it remarkably kind of consistent across all kind of different types of people?
I think the shortness and the burstiness and the fragmentation, the multiple segments and multiple sessions, that's something that we all seem to be doing.
Huh.
There are people who get out their iPhone and read a book for an hour. I mean, I'm not saying that doesn't happen, but this fragmentation is very important. But you hit on something that's really important to say about individual differences. One of the major, so this fragmentation, that's one of the major results. Another major result is the extreme idiosyncrasy of individual use. There's so much darn information, and this device is so well equipped to let us get through it in a number of different ways and to start it and stop it without missing a thing, pause, rewind, multiple windows, all these different things, that you and I have radically different ways of progressing through this content. So it's not just 3 channels like it used to be. You and I can remember that.
Yes.
Or it's not just these large experiences that people are having, and that we might be able to find 3 different categories of users, or even 7 different categories of users. Extreme idiosyncrasy.
This is the future of everything. I'm Russ Altman. I'm speaking with Professor Byron Reeves about the Screenom project, which is watching people at a high resolution as they interact with the screens in their lives. And you were just saying that everybody has almost like their own unique fingerprint of how they navigate. And so now here's a big question. I think you've been studying media for a long time. And so this observation of extreme fragmentation, one of the first questions that I ask is this a result of what's been offered to us? In other words, the media is fragmented, and therefore we have a fragmented experience of it. Or is this actually something that would have been characterized, even if you looked at me 20 or 30 years ago when I was watching TV, listening to radio, reading newspapers? So I guess my question is that fragmentation something that has always been there, or do you think it's a new phenomenon?
I think it's always been latent, but when we were watching TV, what do we have to do to create the fragmentation? We can remember having to get up off of the couch and going over to the device and actually turning the channel. Now we can do it with a remote. So we were limited in what we can do. But now the devices allow us to do what we always wanted to do, which is take control. We want to be actively constructing whatever sequence of content makes sense to us. And I don't care whether each journalist had his own news story, or whether each movie producer really wanted you to see the whole thing without interruption. That's not going to happen. The individual media technology consumer now has got total carte blanche to put this together any way they want. So it's a more active process that probably comes from something that's very natural for us. This is, this is kind of cool. I get to put together whatever string I want, and that's kind of uniquely human about me, to create this, to keep life juiced. That's a little boring. Look over here, look over here, look over here.
It makes me think about, I don't want to go back to the bad old days, but I'm sure anybody who grew up with televisions remembers the person who would walk up to the television and change the channels furiously almost kind of trying to scan for what was on and what might be interesting. And that behavior, which we all thought was very annoying, unless we were the ones doing it, in which case it was, it seems like that channel turning instinct that we had with the old televisions is now fully elaborated, because you can think of these screens as constant channel changing.
It is. It's orders of magnitude, more flexibility in what you do. I mean, the interfaces are constructed to allow you to go at whatever pace and whatever content you see.
Right.
Here's how one reason we know that is that when you take these fragments of use and you look at how they progress during minutes, forget weeks and years, radically different content gets strung together right next to each other. So you can go from, and especially now when all this information is on our screen, and sometimes it's actually happening simultaneously, but I'm texting a child, I'm at a business video conference, I'm buying a t-shirt, I'm looking at pornography, I'm doing financial transactions, all in 10 or 20 second bursts that are put right next to each other. So think about what that string looks like. It's my string. It kind of makes sense to me. It might not make any sense to you when you look at it, but it's my attempt to actively put that together. And then you start thinking about what is the implication of that blurring that happens across all these domains that we used to think are really separate. What happens when all that stuff starts melting together?
So, okay, so this paints a great picture of like what the raw data looks like and the kinds of initial observations you're making. But I know that you and your group have now done studies. You've looked at news-seeking behavior. You've looked at health. Can you tell us some stories about how the Screenom kind of sheds light on some of these areas? Yeah,
well, I think the traditional information domains that we all think about. So you're in health. I'm in politics, somebody else is in finance, somebody else studies social relationships, somebody else studies, what all these silos are. Well, if you're studying media, you're studying a piece of each of those silos strung together into some segment that needs to make sense. So one of the things that we find, for example, is that politics is now very much in the domain in January, I said it was very much in the domain of social relationships. So you and I are friends. You like this person, so I'm kind of biased to do the same if I want to affiliate with you. And then we've got all these exchanges, bang, 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 these fragments of exchanges that confuse our relationship and my interest in a particular political issue. And now throw in this other domain that we used to think was very separate, health. We've got this virus pandemic, and it's totally mixed in with politics and social relationships into a big stew. And I think what we're learning is that it may be a mistake. For an infectious disease researcher, it may be exactly right, separate out the health issues. But if you're interested in the social part of this, it may be a real mistake to separate out our conversations about health from our relationship as friends, from our financial, our neighborhood. So it's this big stew, and that the word Screenom kind of fits well there. So these different fragments, to take the biological metaphor here, these different fragments start configuring in ways that are meaningful when they're put together.
Yeah, and what you're saying really rings true. That my friend might trust my comments about politics because I gave him or her a good recommendation about power tools last week, right? And so my power tool opinions and my political opinions may have nothing to do with one another on the surface, but the fact that they come as a package when you talk to me could affect my believability, my likability, many of my features, and it's a complex function, not just of what I say in one channel. And then you're starting to see these channels. What about the effect on the youth? I made one comment about how kids have like pixel level resolution and pointing by the time they're 2 years old. Are we worried about these, the potential developmental impacts of these technologies? And are you looking at that?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people are worried about this. So this is the badness or goodness of, smartphones or this technology. And just to give you the lead up front, I think that we can get too much interested in whether it's bad or good, because the answer is just easy. It is both. Okay. So here's an example of something that obviously is bad when you first hear it, and then when you think about it, maybe not. So one of the first studies we did was of Stanford students writing papers in their classes. So we can see on their computers and their devices exactly how they chunk up that assignment during the course of a term. Okay, yeah. So they have a history paper. Well, the history paper is not written in one sitting, 5 pages or 10 pages. It's written in tens, if not hundreds of sittings. And here's a result of how so we're able to put those fragments together. The yes. average student, undergraduate in our study at Stanford University, spent 1 minute and 10 seconds writing a paper. So
what?
Yes. So the median length of a paper writing fragment was 1 minute and 10 seconds. So I'm at my computer, type. I go for 1 minute, and then I'm off to something else. Sometimes it's related to the paper.
Right.
But more often than not, it's unrelated to the paper. So I go to I'm off to Facebook to see if Mary Beth posted a new picture of the Saturday night. And then I'm back to the paper or not, or I'm off to something else. So I'm migrating around the internet, but I have to come back to the paper to actually get it done. And then we hear that and we think like, these are our future doctors, lawyers, presidents,
yes.
And we're in trouble, okay? Because there's no contemplation that's happening. There's no abstraction of thought and kind of development of arguments and whatnot. This must be just a terrible thing. Okay, so that is perhaps true, and I'm sure partially true. Okay, so is there anything good about that though? We could both admit here on your podcast whether or not we actually do that. I think you might find if you were to instrument your devices that you probably do that more than you think.
Right.
But or be shorter sessions. But here's some things that happen to these students when they come back to write on their paper after traveling around the internet. They do more editing. They write more sophisticated sentences. So they edit what they had seen to kind of get into it. They write a little more quickly when they come back. So there's something that happened when they went away. They were doing that because they're writing on that first paragraph and type. This is really boring. I think I'm going to check on the party. And that doesn't take long. And it's so easy to do. So I can put in that little 5-10 second piece of juice there and come back and I'm a little bit more excited. And same with work. So that might be interesting, if not good.
Yes.
And so you get these double-edged swords whenever you travel around and look at all these effects.
This is the future of everything. I'm Russ Altman. We'll have more with Professor Byron Reeves about the screens in our lives and what they tell Byron and his colleagues about our behavior, our thoughts, and more. Next on Sirius XM. Welcome back to the Future of Everything. I'm Russ Altman. I'm speaking with Professor Byron Reeves about his study of our screen behaviors. And Byron, in the last segment, you were talking about this really interesting watching students write papers and they go away and stuff happens. And when they come back to the task of writing, they clearly have done work. And that made me remember that you're measuring what they're looking at, but you're not really measuring what they're thinking about. And so how can you, as somebody who's interested in the impact of media on cognition and thought processes, how can you infer, or can you infer what's really going on just based on watching these observables, which are the screens that they're looking at?
So that's a great question, and they are inferences. So if you're going 2 seconds per segment for an hour, I can infer that you're highly aroused and that you might even be manic. Those are safe assumptions, but I haven't measured those things directly. But I will say that in some of the studies, we actually do that. So think about this study that we did, which is very complicated. It's not a usual thing, but we've got the screen on. We're looking at every 5 seconds, which you're seeing on the screen. And you're also living with a device around your wrist that measures your level of arousal by a skin conductance measure. So that your level of excitement at the same time resolution. So now
like heart rate and sweat and all this kind of stuff.
Just the skin response that we have. But just think about a measure of excitement. You know how, and this is an automatic response. This is not some thoughtful thing that you're doing. So, what is the relationship between all these screen changing and your level of excitement? And we can see, for example, that this switching between segments is a very important part of how we're processing technology. And what we used to, my field for 50 years has been defined by, watch this, something new comes on, isn't that exciting?
Right.
Okay, now what we see is people are writing that paper, people are watching something, and the excitement level falls off. And it gets to a low point, and then they say, I got to do something else. Bam, they switch to something new, excitement, and excitement goes up. Or they start thinking, they start thinking about, I've got to do something new because it's getting a little boring. And they start getting excited even before they get to it because they're actively involved here. So you're right in that we have to make inferences about what's going on in the brain while people are doing that. We've done a lot in the laboratory to know what's going on. But this whole project is, the premise of this project is you've got to know what people are looking at in the wild, in their real lives, before you can start talking about, is there a smartphone apocalypse?
Yes, and it's fascinating that clearly connecting this to physiological measures is one step closer to understanding how they are responding to the material. This is the future of everything. I'm Russ Altman. I'm speaking with Professor Byron Reeves. So the other thing I wanted to get to is it strikes me that, and as you said this in the very beginning, and it's just really beginning to sink in, you are seeing parts of people's lives, really all parts of their lives. There's virtually no part of my life that doesn't have some representation on a screen. As you said before, my finances, my personal life, with my relationship with my kids. How does that impact both the ability for you to ask questions, scholarly questions in your field, and also the opportunities for the Screenom more generally?
Yeah, that's well said. So we use the term mediatization. So there's so much of life that's now put in media. So we've mediatized life. We've got it on the screen, and it comes from all different corners. You know, it's a little bit what I do in school, what I do in relationships, what I do in my private life, money, purchases, just all these different things, entertainment, all these different things that are on the screen. So what we've mostly been talking about, how does the fact that it gets on the screen change those parts of life? But as you said, there's also a part of this that's we just get to see more of life. So now folks that are interested in technology are the conduits to actually looking at what happens in people's lives. So we're able to think about things like making medical diagnostic decisions based on what we see in the Screenom. And fine-tune things also, not just overall well-being, over the course of the last month, but maybe a comment you made about a symptom that you had after you started taking a drug. Yep. I mean, just a very specific needle in the haystack, but that's highly valuable and that you might not be able to get any other way. So we can watch how you make financial decisions and purchasing and how that progresses through the day. We can watch how students learn and how they go in and out of learning and entertainment experiences. So we get to see what's going on. Forget how it might actually change what's going on, but that is that's a good thing that researchers now have this opportunity to see this huge big data corpus of life that's progressing over time, and that's a big part of this as well. See how it unfolds over time, but it's a real opportunity to do some social science that we haven't been able to do otherwise.
Well, we'll certainly have to have you come back. I know there are projects in healthcare, in, for example, following teenagers with depression, and in other areas, and this will give us unprecedented ability to make measurements. And as long as the privacy of the participants, which you've already stressed, is respected, it does seem like an unbelievable resource. Well, this is the future of everything. I'm Russ Altman. Thank you for tuning in. And if you've missed any of this episode, listen anytime on demand with the SiriusXM app.